Hey Jamie, how you doing?
Hey Kurt, how are you doing? I'm doing good.
So today's coffee sketch podcast is the big 5-0.
And with a special episode, as we've teased, and everybody takes a sip of their coffee or whatever else is in those cups, we have a special guest. So, someone that I've known basically since this sketch became really important and relevant to today's episode. So, welcome, Jason.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I'm a new friend to Jason, so I'll just break the ice that way. And I just found out that we share the same birthday.
Oh, is that right? So it just passed this past week.
So,
No.
April 11th
Yeah.
was both your birthdays. We're not going to do happy birthday on this episode because we don't have enough time. We've got more important stuff to get to because on April 8th, 30 years ago, something special happened. But before we get to that, Jason, because you're officially our second guest ever on the podcast, other than Tinkerbell, can you introduce yourself real quick?
I'm a cultural historian in the state of Texas, based in Austin and San Marcos. I focus a lot on the cultural and musical history of the state, especially. And like you said, Jamie, we've been friends a very long time. I'm also a bit of a professional culture geek. So that's part of our shared interest in our topic today.
Yeah, so you and I have been friends 30 years or
Yeah.
more, probably more. Yeah, so totally relevant. And yes, I couldn't think of a better guest to talk about this sketch. And because we're actually doing this like with the video stuff, I've got the sketch. I got props. Kurt's gonna be impressed because I'm organized today. So the anniversary, April 8th, 1990. Let's talk about it. Twin Peaks. We get the pilot of Twin Peaks on ABC on network television. And so the sketch this week was the ubiquitous sort of Black Lodge, the Red Room scene, which is not in the pilot. But yeah, so that was if you're going to try and draw an environment that is Twin Peaks, I couldn't think of a better one for my sketch on the anniversary. But before we dive into the sketch and Twin Peaks in general, what is everybody drinking?
Well, we'll let our guest go first.
I have a single origin in Nicaragua. I've been sourcing most of my coffee through Texas Coffee Traders during this long shutdown. They are an old Austin institution. They supply actually most of the restaurants and actually a lot of the coffee shops in town. They're a big roaster, but you can also they have a storefront on the east side.
We've talked about this for a few episodes already. I'm still, again, a benefit the phoenix that's risen out of the ashes of this stay-at-home order is a neighbor was not interested in this pound bag of espresso beans from Starbucks that I quickly swooped over to that porch just so Jason knows where we've been or where I've been. And so I'm still working on that.
Basically stealing coffee off of people's porches during the recent pandemic.
Porch pickup
not
only.
necessarily.
I think I'd already told Jamie that was the only thing we really hoarded. We were pretty sensible on all other products. We have enough, but coffee is the thing that I bought pounds and pounds of because I don't want to run out.
Yeah.
So coffee for this today has been all day black as midnight on a moonless night, and I'll just leave it there. But as we're recording this later, I have switched to some Guinness. So, but I see that, Jason, you have, as we've talked about before, you have staged the background completely appropriately for this episode, and I totally appreciate that. Can you introduce us to your other guests for this podcast?
Oh, sure. I have the Funko Pop Log Lady and Agent Dale Cooper, and then there's also an owl hiding out in the background.
Because the owls are not what they appear to be.
Yes.
This is excellent. I know I should let you guys run with it because so I have to admit I totally missed the boat when the original series came out. So I never watched it in real time. And so I'm trying to do my catch up as quick as I can. So Jamie said, watch the trailer and watch the movie. I got as far as watching the not the trailer, the pilot. I got the pilot done I didn't yet get. I shame myself. I didn't get the movie in, but that pilot was an hour and a half long, which was kind of unexpected for something that was on network TV. So I do understand the log lady, I think, and the agent, right? So I'm going to let you guys jump into it. And it's going to be one of those things that I'm going to really enjoy hearing some of this backstory and then watching it as I see it fresh for the first time.
Well, and Jace, I have to say that when Kurt decided he finally was going to like dive in and watch the pilot, of course he had to tell me and like apologize that it took him so long. But he live texted like as he watched it, so it was very, very similar to our recent rewatching of with our Netflix party, which was pretty great. And so shout out to Mr. Chu on that as well for joining us. So I think the live texting and commentary that kind of runs along with that was pretty appropriate.
And I would also say I made the mistake when introducing my wife Andrea to Twin Peaks of watching the movie first, because chronologically, well, the movie is made after the first series, but the events in time are before the series. So I thought we'd watch that first, but you shouldn't watch that until you finish the first season because it's a huge spoiler for what happens in that series.
Right, yeah, spoiler alert, you find out way too much if you watch the movie, which is labeled a prequel. Yes, absolutely.
Jamie gave me
even the title gives stuff away.
Jamie gave me very explicit instructions. Watch the pilot first. But now I kind of want to watch the rest of the first season then and wait for the movie. It sounds like.
At this point, I think that's reasonable. So.
Okay. Well, since you guys I didn't get it done before this recording, but so should we talk about the sketch first, or you want to talk about the show?
Well, I mean, so the sketch. I mean, you think that do you think it sort of captures sort of the essence? I mean, when you saw the sketch, Jace, did you exactly what it was?
Oh yeah, it sends chills up my spine. Like I'm doing a rewatch of the whole season or the whole series right now, and it's remarkable how powerful the super Lynchian moments when he moves into that sort of creepy supernatural world. He is so good at creating that atmosphere, and your sketch communicates that. Like seeing that it frightens me a little bit.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily trying to, scare you, but I think that the thing about that there's something certainly special about the Black Lodge. I mean, and even when it's sort of introduced, you're really not even sure what's going on. And I think that with David Lynch's work, I mean, it was something that we were talking about this recently sort of when did we get into David Lynch? Were we like and how and why? But it's a master filmmaker and storyteller, but certainly at the same time, there's so many layers to it. And I think as a designer, as an architect, I can really kind of appreciate, we've talked about relationships of architecture to film before. And I think that especially in the rewatches, is sort of seeing those details, seeing those shots. I think you're one of your first text comments was in the pilot when they show that stair scene and kind of that one camera shot looking up the staircase, and she's calling out to try and wake up Laura. It's just eerie.
Yeah, I think one of the primary themes is sort of how the very mundane architecture and space of suburban domesticity hides so much, right? Which in this series has all these dark supernatural dimensions, but it's also primarily just about repressed trauma and cycles of abuse, but then situating them in these like mundane suburban spaces. So yeah, that shot up that stairwell to that slowly spinning fan, it's such a mundane thing that we can all picture that space. We've been in that space. It's been, repeated in all kinds of sitcoms, that stairwell. But here in this context, it's completely transformed in a weird way. And it's just music and setting.
Well, I do remember that part. But now, it doesn't mean anything yet for me. So it's really exciting to see how this is going to start. And this, the part for me at least, that is intriguing, that there is the depth and layers to the storyline. And I mean, I've seen some other Lynch work like Mulholland Drive, and it takes me, I've watched it a few times and I still can't quite figure out some of the decisions, but that's the intriguing part.
Well, I mean, from what I remember about Mulholland Drive was that it was shot in sort of two different sequences where I think, and this is something that maybe I'm supposing, but I think it's probably pretty accurate, is a lot of studios probably take a little bit of a wary touch to Lynch and some of his work. And so even in the case of Twin Peaks, the pilot was shot, and with many, many pilots, they're shot, and then people aren't necessarily sure if they're going to get picked up as a series. So there's sort of an inevitable delay. And I believe with Mulholland Drive, I think there was something very similar where they shot some of it as in one format, and then they came back and finished it up and sort of pieced it back together as one film. And so there is a little bit of a narrative jump in the film that I think loses a lot of folks, but it's still, I think it's still like a masterwork in terms of Lynch's portfolio.
In a lot of Jamie's sketches, which the fun part is that he weaves in themes of pop culture and film and current events and things like that into his scenes. And I get it now. So there's the rug that Jamie's using in his background because we're recording this on Zoom. So it's starting to sink in. But the rendering too, I think Jason, you alluded to that it's sort of spine chilling. And Jamie captures, I mean, that's one thing that really is fun about this podcast is that all of his sketches capture a still frame image, but create a lot of dynamics, and you start to sort of live into his sketches. Jamie, your sketches, you kind of, they draw you in.
Well, there is I will say that in this particular one, I knew what kind of mood I was trying to create. And I think the biggest choice that I made was that I really had to crosshatch quite a bit, because it really gives, and when you're only using one pen and only one line weight, and you're trying to do it relatively quickly, I think the crosshatch texturally gives a real depth to a space, and a space like that is intended to be ethereal and mysterious and foreboding in a lot of sense. I think that's where I was trying to get with it. And then at the same time, render that reality so that there's some recognizable, it's a simple space, but the pattern is so distinctive. It's emblematic of things. And I think that those little iconic pieces, even in this case, it was what I was mad at myself. And I've talked about this before with my sketches, is sometimes I plan them out pretty well in my head. And then I start putting pen to paper, and then I'm really trying to, render the scene correctly. And I realized, damn, I put the chairs too close to the foreground, so I'm not going to get as much floor as I thought I was going to get, and I still wanted it to represent that room. So anyhow, there we go.
Yeah, you'll often see
works.
the room abstracted just to that jagged pattern and the red of the curtains. Like that's enough to evoke the entire room for a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, even though I'm like the super novice here, you cheated, and your Zoom background has the room, and then the sketch, I quickly gathered that. So you still got it in the sketch, but you still got to keep in mind that they're 10 to 15 minute sketches. So that quickness that you're performing this.
Well, and the lodge itself, I mean, there's different scenes, and it appears in different ways in the episodes, and we won't give too much away for Kurt, who's going to religiously watch this after we break from this episode. But I think that there's very, very few elements that appear in the room, if ever. And then there are also very, very few characters who ever appear. I had to look it up because I haven't done the rewatch that Jason's probably in. Have you gotten to episode where you get the first appearance?
The Black Lodge shows up much earlier than I remembered. It's in one of the initial, it might be the third or fourth. I think it might even be the third, the end of the third. And it shows up first as a dream sequence. And it's normally in some kind of dream sequence, although not always. At some point you do physically get in there. But yeah, it appears first as a dream sequence.
Yeah, and isn't that the dream sequence where the left arm makes his appearance as well?
Yes, so the man from another place, the arm, does his dance. And those scenes too, one of the reasons they're so creepy is that they're shot in reverse. So they're kind of like, there's this oddness to the whole thing.
Huh.
Yeah, there's almost like a pixelization, like it's sort of like it's almost like a rendered reality. And not to say that was on my mind, but it was on my mind. I mean, and that's why the cross-hatching is like, how do you render something where there's this crackle to it? Sort of like our discussion the other night about electricity being a theme in Lynch's work. There's this kind of crackle, and I think that the sketch tries to get that crackle. It's not, it's, yeah, it meets with modest success, I guess.
I think it's in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, a part of the country, because of the logging and all that. Because the one thing I was wondering while watching this pilot, and even though it was 1990, or kids in that generation, I said, who lets these kids go to the bars, and who lets them go hang out with bikers? And this, like, what kind of, oh, we're going to talk about this later.
Wait till you see when they go to Canada.
Like, it's one and the same time, the 1990s and the 1950s, like a lot of Lynch's work, kind of the touchstone of the aesthetic, and the teenagers, right? It's all Bobby Soxers and like leather jacket, and James Dean is a big touchstone. So it's kind of timeless as much as anything, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, like James Hurley on his bike, Audrey Horne in her outfit that she changes when she gets to school, and then the main character is introduced deceased.
Right.
I mean, that's, and then consequently, even maybe the main character that's associated with it, you know, Dale Cooper, Agent Cooper, doesn't appear in that pilot for quite a while. I mean, and even when he does make his appearance, you're almost at a certain point not even sure if this individual is legit. And I think there's that sort of interesting writing and cadence and pace to the show that really captivated viewers and certainly captivated me. You knew it was going to be a mystery, but even all the characters have this dimension to them that like Jason was talking about, this, when you're kind of living in suburbia and you're looking at sort of some of these environments, there's the owls aren't what they seem. It's kind of interesting.
And maybe that's what pulled us in, Jamie, as angsty suburban teenagers, now that I look back on it.
And a lot of flannel. Yeah.
I think this is something that Jamie and I were chatting about last week or the week before, about the 90s and the flannel. And I think I took it in the direction of like grunge music and not so much television, like the Twin Peaks show, and then Jamie, I think, did a little bit of both.
Well, I think too, it's relevant here. I heard someone recently, like I've been spending some time with the Twin Peaks fan culture, and someone was making the case that there wouldn't be a Starbucks without Twin Peaks, which is a bold claim, but
Wow.
I think that those things are coming in at the same time, right? That whole Pacific Northwest aesthetic, that wave of grunge, Twin Peaks, X-Files, also British Columbia, right? Like Pacific Northwest, a lot of that film, and Starbucks, like that whole coffee culture that's so important in Twin Peaks, and then is also given this boost in Starbucks.
Well, and even with the coffee, I think that's a great, sort of segue, is that I joke when I say that coffee should be served black as midnight, but there's some wonderful lines talking about coffee and the expression of drinking it and sort of enjoying the moment. Cooper at some point starts to explain to somebody, kind of giving them almost sort of a motivational Monday kind of advice, where he's like, give yourself a little gift each and every day. And it can be a little thing. And those little things, I think, could include just sort of sitting back and just enjoying a really good cup of coffee.
I think
or
you're
a sketch.
right. Yeah, that experience and the role that coffee's played in my life, I hadn't thought of Twin Peaks as being the influence there, but I bet it is. That thought of taking joy in this thing that most people consider routine.
I mean, admittedly, at the time we were watching this series, we were spending a whole lot of time going to Denny's and drinking a lot of coffee.
Which was not a damn fine cup of coffee. That
it was not a damn fine cup of coffee. And there were no donuts, but
you do what you can.
You do what you can, exactly.
I did grow up, when I was a teenager, we would go to the diners, Connecticut, or diner. So like when you're not old enough to go to the bars, but you didn't want to go home, you go to the diner and just eat. But at that age, you have this fantastic metabolism that you can eat anything at any time. But and drink coffee even late into the evening. But so I wanted to ask, I don't want to jump around, but it's like the very first thing that happens, where that police officer discovers the body wrapped in plastic. I swear he said, when he got on the phone that it's her, or I found her, or something like that, instead of I found a body. Or did I miss it? It just seems strange the way that first cop that,
But that's not a cop.
or is it sheriff or
No,
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 no, no, no. He's the employee, right? Like a logger guy.
He's at the mill.
Yeah.
So yeah,
She's dead? Is that
she's
the phrase?
dead. Yeah.
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 How's he supposed? It sounds like he knows that something went down.
I think we're supposed to be open to the possibility that everyone was worried about the trajectory of this young woman's life, and that maybe there was a sense of foreboding. I think we're supposed to read that into it, although it may or may not be there. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, and also it's sort of that idea of whether it's a small town or it's suburbia, you have these sort of caricatures of people, and she's the homecoming queen. So everybody sort of knows who the homecoming queen is to some degree or not, but maybe doesn't necessarily know all the layers to that person's personality or life, or as you suggest, even the trajectory of their life. And so there might be some aspects of people kind of concerned, but then there's also some people who are completely oblivious, but only know her from one image. And I think that there's sort of almost these mixed metaphors and mixed viewings of it that are intentional, I think, in Lynch's work in general, is that you could kind of come at it from one viewer's angle and then come at it from a different one and be looking at the same thing. And I think that that's sort of an interesting aspect of it.
Well, yeah. So I did hear that right then. It's really interesting. Really quickly, it jumps from scene to scene with introducing so many characters within the first 5 minutes. And you're starting to figure out like who are all these people, and then they start weaving together, right? But the character depth though is nice because I mean, obviously you kind of set me up, but like quickly you realize that each character that is shown is for a reason and has you see there's a lot behind the storyline, right, that you'll eventually find out. So it's not accidental, or so I'm excited to see how this unfolds.
And I mean, Kyle MacLachlan, I mean, his performance is pretty amazing.
Oh, that because we only have like 8 minutes left, that gives me an anecdote that I can tell. And I almost forgot, Jamie. So I don't know, I'd say 20 episodes ago, we talked about a client I had, Stan Winston, the creature creator for Jurassic Park and Terminator. And so when I worked in California, I designed a remodel of his house in Malibu. So then watching all this Twin Peaks stuff, then I remembered one time we had a meeting at a restaurant in Malibu, and Stan then gets up from the table, turns to the table next to us, and congratulates this guy. And it was Kyle MacLachlan. And I turned my head and I'm like, oh yeah, oh, that's that guy. Like Stan's just like neighbors. Hey, good job on that, whatever. This was in 2004 or 5 or something like that.
As of today, that experience would have been that much better.
Yeah, I probably would have been like a little bit over like a frenzied fanboy.
So Jason, now that you're doing started in on the rewatch, I mean, are there some favorite episodes that you have from the series? I mean, or even scenes that you're excited to see again?
Well, I'm reminded how tight the first season is. Like, they're all strong episodes. I think we talked about I don't know if it's third or fourth. It depends on how you count the pilot. But the first episode with the Black Lodge, which I think is also the episode where he does the rock throwing and the introduction of Tibet as a theme, and you see that he's like a very odd FBI agent. So that's very early on. I love that one. I look forward to getting to the finale of the second season as well.
Well, and then I think that I don't remember exactly what episode it is in the second season, but you mentioned the X-Files, And a lot of people don't even realize that there is a link between the X-Files and Twin Peaks, with their FBI agent. Not the way, no, Kurt, not the way you're excited about. But David makes his appearance in it. I mean, I think that's sort of, Scully doesn't appear, but Gillian Anderson is not in Twin Peaks. But Duchovny, makes his appearance, and I think it's pretty exciting. I mean, it's interesting, and I think it's, again, Lynch being super inventive with his scripts and scenes. And I mean, even David Bowie makes an appearance in all this stuff.
Well, and in the movie, it's David Bowie and Chris Isaac and Kiefer Sutherland are all FBI agents in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So I was a early viewer of X-Files stuff. I was really into that show. And that's interesting. I like that.
So I'm not even going to tell you. You're just going to have to wait and see. But it's all very good. I mean, and then season 3, which is there's a foreshadowing line in Twin Peaks when they were originally aired that a lot of fans really hung on to, was that the show would be back in 25 years and that there would be sort of a conclusion or some reconnection with Cooper and Laura. And I think that season 3 and Showtime airing the third season approximately 25 years later, I think was pretty amazing. So we did get that third season, and really it explores, like, really brings the show full circle.
Now I remember that. So that's not very long ago. I mean, it's about 5 years ago.
Maybe like 2 or 3 years ago.
I shared this with Jason and Sonny when we rewatched the pilot. I said that my dad, who knew that I really liked Twin Peaks, and he remembers me watching when it first aired. I mean, that's what we all did. We sort of all stayed at home and watched, or taped it on our VCRs, watched it religiously at that moment. But then the thing is like, when you watch this first season, the second season, and the movie, watching season 3 on Showtime many, many years later isn't that much of a stretch. But if you've never watched season 1, season 2, or the movie, and you watch the first episode of season 3 just because you're like, hey, I'm going to connect with my son and watch this series that he likes, that's a really awkward conversation afterwards.
Oh, man. Well.
Yeah, but love you, Dad. Yeah, thanks.
So we're under a minute or so, I think. We'll say our brief goodbyes.
I really appreciated the chance to come on, and I'll do it in a heartbeat any other time.
And any last words for you, Jamie?
I just want to thank you, Jace, for doing this. If there was anybody to share the 50th episode and Twin Peaks, timing just worked out really, really well. And when it all sort of materialized that way, I was like, I think I know what our 50th episode's going to be. So we're just over a year into the podcast, and I can't thank Kurt enough for having this great idea.
Well, thanks. And happy birthday, Jason. Happy birthday, us.
Happy birthday, Kurt.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.